Hello, my name is James Bunyan, and after finishing my history degree down in London, I worked for the Christian Union movement for a couple of years, and the Christian Union at Nottingham-Trent have asked me to come and speak on this issue of redefine evidence. What is it really to have evidence for Christianity? People often ask for proof, but what does it mean to have evidence? And I'm currently training to be a vicar in the Church of England. So that's me. Let's crack straight on. I'd love to say something about the discipline of history which I studied and whether we can really know things before I go on to talk about Christianity in particular. Can we really know stuff in the past? Is it all just language? It was a long time ago. Writers had their own agendas. We have ours. Isn't it all just lost to the mists of time? Surely stuff in the past we just can't really properly know. Maybe this is something that you believe. Well, this is a view that kind of came out of postmodernist attitudes, especially this time around in the 1980s. And I'd want to acknowledge the difficulty of knowing things for sure in the past. But a good historian will believe that it's still possible, and they'll bear these things in mind as they come to look at the evidence. As a result, the historian talks not about proof, which is a mathematical concept. You kind of write it out on a piece of paper, and QED, you've proved it. People can see demonstrably that it's true. Historians instead talk, like other social sciences, about evidence. Is there a body of evidence that comes together that says this is the most likely interpretation? Written is the most important form of evidence, but there's also archaeology, pictures. Recently there's videos. And what we have to do is kind of come to these bits of evidence thoughtfully, carefully, critically, bearing in mind the evidence we don't have to reach conclusions about the past. All to say, simply put, this is what I learned from studying history, is this: we can know things about the past truly, even if we can't know them perfectly. We can know things about the past truly, even if we can't know them exhaustively, knowing everything there is to say. Richard J. Evans, in his book In Defense of History, which is amazing, by the way, he's kind of defending the practice of history, and he finishes by saying, in spite of all these things, I do believe sincerely that we can actually know what happened in the past and write coherent statements about it. The essay I wrote in first year, or one of the ones I wrote, was called What Qualities of Mind, or kind of character bits, should a historian have? A surprising one that I found is one called honesty, integrity. A historian has to have integrity to follow the evidence wherever it leads. This is Richard J. Evans again. The first prerequisite of the serious historical researcher must be the ability to jettison dearly held interpretations in face of the resistance of the evidence. We've got to be able to admit that we're wrong sometimes. We've got to be able to say, actually, I think the evidence is taking me this way. Well, we all have our own prejudices that we follow, our pre-assumptions, whatever kind of historical field we're looking at. One of the great things about the evidence is it doesn't care about your prejudices. It comes and it slaps them. I can't write something as a historian that the evidence just doesn't allow, I should say. When I wrote my dissertation on the establishment of the State of Israel in the 1940s, one of my conclusions, as I was talking about a British Army unit called the Jewish Brigade and whether they contributed to the establishment of the Jewish state, post-war Europe was a mess and the Jewish Brigade were doing all sorts in Italy, but there was no documentation, and I had to just write in my dissertation, we actually don't know the effects of some of these things because there isn't enough evidence. I wasn't marked down for that. That's just how it works. All of this stuff becomes important for our question. I guess to share my story, like lots of religious people, I guess I came to university thinking, well, this is true. Stuff about Jesus and the Bible, I don't necessarily know why, but all of a sudden I've been trained to think critically about the evidence. Are the Gospels worthy sources? Did Jesus even exist? Did Jesus, I guess, start off in one sense And then the church institutionally took Christianity in a completely different direction. Is that what's true? But I learned something else. I learned that actually, when it comes to Jesus, everybody's got preconceptions. Everyone's got prejudices. I remember being in a seminar once, and we're all sat around, and it was about biography and whether biography can ever be good history. And I said to the guy next to me, quietly, I was like, well, the Gospels are good history. And complete snake, he just turned around and said to the whole room, what? This guy says the Gospels! And like 20 heads just snapped round. And a guy opposite me sort of looked me in the eye and just went, no, which is a very reasonable response. And for the next half an hour, the lecturer was completely silent as they all just sort of piled in, and I was talking about the Gospels and whether I think they're a real history. In the end, I went back and read a couple of books on stuff, and I lent one called The Case for Christ. It's a bit old now, but about the Gospels and reliability, and I handed it to the guy who'd shouted no, and a week later he came back to me and he gave it to me and he just went, yeah, fair play, and walked off. I guess I thought that was funny. But the whole thing is that nobody's neutral about Jesus. That's what I'm trying to say. People have strong opinions. Why is that? Well, it's because he says hard things. Things that almost don't seem very historical. He says things like this: I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father except through me. In other words, Jesus demands things of you and I that no other historical figure does. We either love him for it or we dismiss him for it. But either way, we're not neutral on this. For Christians like me, the stakes get higher because I think Christianity is unique in world religions in that it can be assessed historically on two grounds. First of all, depends on a written source, the Bible. And secondly, Christianity depends on a historical event, the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. So we're going to ask two questions today as we reassess this evidence. First of all, is the Bible, is the New Testament reliable? Second of all, did Jesus really rise from the dead? And look, straight away, we'll have prejudices. But that could never happen. Jesus obviously didn't rise from the dead because miracles don't happen, and so it's nonsense. Well, we just need to be slightly careful before we do that. It's not just classic religious people being gullible. Look, it's not humble to ask for evidence and then dismiss any evidence that there might be because we've decided it can't possibly exist. We're not the sole standard of truth. I'd love to invite us to be good historians. I'd love to just highlight some of the evidence and then allow us to think about that and take it wherever it leads. Well, first of all, is the New Testament reliable? And I like to break this question down into three parts. First of all, has it been reliably transmitted from ancient times to today? Second of all, was it reliably written? And thirdly, as we come to read it, does it just have the ring of truth about it? Well, first of all, was it reliably transmitted? And this is a bit of a problem of history because paper isn't that durable. Archaeology, you can dig up the original stuff from thousands of years ago. Paper, you can't do that because it rots. It's hard to keep. And so what you do is you basically take as many copies, called manuscripts, if you like, of an original work. Let's say I wrote a diary 2,000 years ago, and 500 years later, there's a load of copies of it around the world because I'm a famous guy. And you take all those copies, those manuscripts, and you bring them together and you go, what similarities do they have? How do we work out what was in the original? And the way that works is the more manuscripts there are, and the closer to the original time period, and over a broad geographical area, the more obvious it is what the original had to say. That's just how ancient history works. And this is where I think Christianity has got an awful lot of swagger. See, let me do some stats. So, works of Plato, for instance, there are 7 ancient manuscripts that are used in the translation of kind of copies of Plato. And there's an 1,200-year gap between when Plato was written, some of his works, and when some of the manuscripts have been used. Similarly, Herodotus writing his histories. There are 8 copies of this manuscript and 1,300-year gap between originally written and then transmitted like this. Now, The reality is that you get serious academic ancient historians who have no qualms or quibbles about constructing their entire academic careers on knowing what Plato and Herodotus says. This is still quite a reliable way of doing it, even though there's not that many manuscripts. The New Testament, on the other hand, this is from Josh McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, says that there are 5,000 manuscripts of the New Testament. Even if we got rid of all those manuscripts, we could almost completely reconstruct the New Testament from the works of kind of early church theologians before the year 300. There's not much gap. I guess that shows that what we've got in the New Testament today, if you bought one and read it, corresponds to what was originally written. The claim that the book has been corrupted simply doesn't hold up. Why? Why were there so many manuscripts? Why did people copy it so much? Well, because Christianity was a popular movement like never before. And what would happen is you'd hear this great news, you'd decide to be a Christian, like, this is great, and you'd write it all down, you'd make a copy, and you'd send it to your mate, and just manuscripts exploded across the Near Eastern world, which means we can be really sure about what the New Testament contained. Was it reliably transmitted? Yes. Was it reliably written? L. Ron Hubbard, off of Scientology, says, you don't get rich writing science fiction. If you want to get rich, start a religion. Was that true of the Bible writers? As they taught that Jesus was God and that he rose again from the dead, that he could take away sins and give humanity happiness and joy. Was that loads of people became Christians and they became, I guess, influential? The church did. Is that what happened? People were just trying to get rich. Well, Jesus himself was a homeless teacher who died horribly. So he certainly believed what he was teaching. He wasn't trying to get rich. Interestingly, the 11 out of the 12 disciples who started the church and kicked this whole thing off were executed in poverty, saying, we really believe that Jesus died and that he rose again. They didn't get wealthy. Now, I think that people are willing to die for a lie. You know, terrorists might do that. But I don't think that people die for a lie that they know is a lie. It's one thing to say, well, I believe this because somebody else told me, but to say, I'm willing to die saying that I saw Jesus die and saw him rise again, that's just different gravy. They must have genuinely believed it. There's a great book by a guy called Peter J. Williams from Cambridge University called Can We Trust the Gospels? It's a pretty new one. And he makes the point that, look, the first leaders just come across really badly. As they write their Gospels, Jesus is the main hero, and the disciples just bumble around, getting stuff wrong and being idiots, and it's just comical. And this is not the kind of book you write if you just want to paint yourself in a brilliant light and get rich. Look, the claim that they're trying to be manipulative just doesn't hold up. Let me read to you the start of Luke's Gospel, one of the main parts of the New Testament. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you might know the certainty of the things you've been taught. Apart from anything else, you can hear his great sincerity here. He's not trying to manipulate you. Well, thirdly, does the New Testament have the ring of truth to it? Do the authors display evidence of understanding the times? See, there's no such thing as Google Earth. Back then, there's no such thing as Google. If the New Testament writers were just making up a story in Palestine a long time ago, they wouldn't have understood much about the local customs. In the book, Can We Trust the Gospels? Peter Williams asks the following questions. Do the authors understand local customs, names, finances, practices, local languages and dialects, local geography, rivers, roads, towns, local botany, trees and that? Do they understand recent history in the area? Do they understand basic human reactions to events? And even a cursory reading of one of the Gospels shows that the answer is an absolutely emphatic yes to all of those things. It's not the kind of thing you make up, these were written by Jewish writers from first century Palestine, who also were absolutely committed to convinced of the truth of Jesus' claims, and who therefore wrote as carefully as they possibly could. I guess in all these things, sooner or later, we've done lots of the work around what the New Testament says. Sooner or later, we're going to have to just pick it up and read it for ourselves. Because in Christianity, the New Testament, if you like, is the evidence. The Christians believe that God has given the New Testament, the Bible, as his great big bit of evidence. And we can ask loads of questions about it, but sooner or later we've got to be humble enough to come to it ourselves and to interact with it. So let me do that now as we ask the second question: did Jesus rise from the dead? And let me read an extract of the New Testament for us. This is just after Jesus has been killed on the cross. Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. It was preparation day, that is the day before the Sabbath. So as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So Joseph brought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in the linen, and placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph saw where he was laid. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who's going to roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Don't be alarmed, he said. You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. 4 bits of evidence here that Jesus really rose from the dead, and worth unpacking them and thinking about them and whether or not they stand up to scrutiny. First of all, Jesus was really dead. It became cool a few decades ago to teach that Jesus, sure, that there were resurrection appearances, but it's just because he got poorly on the cross. And when he was put in the cold tomb, he kind of got better and then went out and showed himself to everyone. The problem with this is that Romans are experts in killing people. Crucifixion was nasty, but it was thorough. And you see the Roman governor, Pilate, check with the soldiers, is he really dead? And the guys whose job it was to get him killed were like, yes, he's properly dead. Not only that, but he gets embalmed by some friends. His body's taken down, wrapped carefully, and put in a tomb. And you don't do that for hours without noticing whether someone's really dead or not. He was really dead. Second of all, the body was really missing. What is it that kind of angelic figure says? Don't be alarmed, he said. You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See the place where they've laid him. The best way to kill Christianity in the early days was to produce Jesus' body. Even today, if you found a tomb and you did the DNA bits, however you do that, and you proved that Jesus was really still dead, Christianity would crumble. The belief of Christianity is that someone who's just a man and dead can't actually help you in any real way. And that would definitely have been true in the first century. If someone had just said, look, you just got it wrong, here's the tomb and it's full of this guy called Jesus, the movement would just never have spread. But these guys who had watched where Jesus' body were laid, they knew where the tomb was, and when they turned up, the body was missing. The stone was rolled away. This huge stone, if you like, that had been rolled in front of the tomb to seal it, had been moved. Thirdly, the women here did not expect to see what they saw. They were expecting to turn up and to find a dead body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? They're expecting to find a body, and what they found was the body had gone. The person had risen from the dead. From this point, they're so freaked out. What is it the angelic figure says? He says, look, go away and tell the disciples all about this, because this is great. But instead, trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. ... That's how the account of Jesus' life actually ends. They don't say anything to anybody. These are not people who had hallucinated. These are not people who were desperate to make up. No one believed that dead people come back from the dead. That's crazy. And these women are freaking out. And they go away, and instead of doing what they're told, they say nothing to anybody because they're totally afraid. This is not a case of them premeditatively making something up. The women did not expect to see what they saw. And lastly, and most compellingly for me, Christianity grew exponentially from this point. The figure says, he's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. The rest of the New Testament makes it really clear that Jesus appeared several times alive again to individuals, as well as to crowds sometimes of up to several hundred people. That the apostles, their message wasn't just that we believe vaguely that something's happened, but that I have seen Jesus dead and I saw him alive again and I believe that he is God. And it's amazing the people who were persuaded, distraught people brought to joy, skeptical people, he thought this could never happen, persuaded that it did. Jewish people who believed that after a day in the ground, the soul had kind of left the body, they're utterly persuaded that this happened. In some of the resurrection appearances, you've got Jesus eating, sitting, talking, hugging his mates. There's something happened that turned these band of disciples who it was finished. Christianity was dead when Jesus was killed. Turn them into courageous men and women willing to die to say, we actually think this is true. Sociologist Rodney Stark wrote a book when he wasn't a Christian called The Sociological Rise of Christianity. He's trying to work out, how did this religion come to be? And very famously, in the first edition, there's a footnote as he's discussing some of the evidence. You follow the footnote down, and on the bottom it just says, that first Easter Sunday, something happened. And Rodney Stark himself later became a Christian. Look, perhaps you're not totally satisfied by this point. After all, it's just been a 20-minute talk put on by the Christian Union. Of course, Christians think this. And that's okay, but don't leave it here. Hopefully you've seen that Christianity is historically bound, that the New Testament, the Bible, deserves respect, and that the resurrection, amazing though it is, at least needs to be dealt with historically. Keep investigating. I guess our message to you as the Christian Union is that you don't want to miss out on joy, on life. I think for most people, the reality is people are apathetic about religion. They're bored about it. They can't be bothered to think about these things. And they miss out on the greatest treasure this world could afford. But we should at least be honest with ourselves about that. What are you going to do? And the message of the Christians is that in this historically weighty, founded Christianity, we found joy, happiness. This is phenomenal stuff. We believe we've been forgiven of everything we've ever done. And we're really loved by somebody called Jesus. Our message to you is to keep thinking, keep going. After all, as Richard J. Evans says, the first prerequisite of the serious historical researcher must be the ability to jettison deeply held interpretations in the face of the evidence.